Hey everyone, in this video we're going to come back to chapter 18 of the Road to Latin textbook and take a look at the second story in this chapter, which is called Fabula Orbili II. So you might remember in the first one we had their teacher Orbilius who was telling the kids the story about the Trojan War, and that's where we're going to pick up in sort of the second half of the story. Before you dive in though, like I always tell you, if you want to see the story in a different way or get some more resources for it, or even the chapter in general, feel free to check out my website. You can find everything there. Translations, you can find vocab help, grammar help, notes, just a bunch of different things that will probably help you understand this story a little bit better. And like I always tell you, the first thing you want to do is make sure that you feel really, really comfortable with the vocab. Now, since this is the second story in chapter 18, I'm assuming you probably already do, but in case you don't, just go back and brush up on the vocab. Make sure you've practiced it a little bit and you feel really comfortable. Same thing with the grammar too. The stories are a really good way to see the grammar in context and practice them, but you still want to have a general idea of what's going on before you dive in, just so you're not feeling totally lost by reading the story. So once you feel like you're in a good place, you're ready to dive into the story, I always tell you this, you should find someone you can read the story to. If you can find a classmate, that would be ideal because you could read the story to them and practice your speaking and pronunciation and then have them read the story back to you so you can work on your listening skills. I tell you this in every video, but you never want to shut those off. Latin is a language and you want to treat it as such, right? You don't want to turn off ways you can learn through speaking, listening, just things like that. You don't want to always be just reading and translating because that's not really going to get you as far as it probably should. So once you're in that place and you're feeling ready to go, dive into the story and we can go through it right now. So remember, this is the second half of Orbilius' story. So he's talking about the Trojan War. So he starts by saying, Achilles, filius Pelii, est clarus Graecus. So Achilles, the filius, the son of Peleus, that's his famous father, right? The son of Peleus is a famous Greek, a Graecus clarus, right? A famous Greek. He's a warrior, right? If you haven't heard of Achilles, again, I'd encourage you to look up the story of the Trojan War. He's one of, if not the most famous character in the story. It really is a story about him. And he's the best fighter that is on the Greek side and probably the best fighter in the entire war. So you definitely want to look him up a little bit so you understand who Orbilius is referencing, right? But he describes him here as a Claudus Graecus, right? A famous Greek. Then he continues, says, si copias Graecas ducit, Graecis victoria est. So if he leads, ducit, meaning if Achilles leads, the copias Graecas. Remember, copia, when you pluralize it, it really means troops, right? It can also mean supplies, but here it really is talking about the soldiers. So it's saying if he leads the Greek troops, there is, right, est, Victoria, there is victory for the Greeks. There's your dative, right? Victory is for the Greeks, so you could say there is victory for the Greeks. So the idea here is that if Achilles is there, they're going to win. Sed Achilles iratus est quod captiva pulchra ab eo rapta est. So if he leads the army, they win. But, right, said, so Orbilius is saying that's not exactly what's happening here, but Achilles is angry, eratos est, right? He's angry because a captiva pulchra, a beautiful captive, and you'll notice that captiva and pulchra are first declension, which means it's a female captive. So if I remember right, this is talking about Briseis, the famous priestess that he captured for his own, right? Achilles has a captive, and this captive, rapta est, is taken or was taken from him, abeo, right? It was taken away from him. So that's why he gets so mad. He has this beautiful captive and she's taken away. So he decides he's not going to fight. Then he continues, and that's exactly what Orbilius says here. Etaque in tabernaculo sedet neque pugnat. And so, because his captiva pulchra was taken away, right, sedet, he sits in tabernaculo, in his tent, and does not fight, neque pugnat, nor does he fight. So he sits in his tent, he decides to not fight. It's sort of like the little kid, right? I'm going to take my ball and go home. I'm not going to play with you guys anymore. That's kind of how Achilles comes off, but he's mad that his prize has been taken, right? And then it continues. You have Patroclus amicus cum sociis multis ad tabernaculum venit. So his friend Patroclus. So this part is kind of funny. What Road to Latin is doing is trying to go toe the middle line by calling Patroclus his friend. You can look this up. It's not to incite any, major, controversy here in the description, but you should have a discussion on who Patroclus is. A lot of sources consider him, in some versions, Achilles' lover. Sometimes he's referred to as like a family member. I think cousin is kind of the word that gets thrown around a little bit. I'll leave that for you. We don't have to go crazy here. We'll just kind of take it as, Road to Latin has described it. But the relationship between Patroclus and Achilles is a really interesting one. And I'd encourage you to look it up, right, on your own. Friend is probably, like I said, the most sort of middle of the road, non-controversial way you could describe Patroclus and his relationship to Achilles. But look it up on your own. I'd highly encourage you to, because there's definitely more than one way to understand their relationship together. But here we have his friend Patroclus, right? Venit ad tabernaculum. He comes to the tent, cum sociis multis, with many allies, right? Sociis multis. So all of Achilles' friends and allies, they show up at the tent trying to convince him to fight. Then you have cur pro patria non pugnas amice, Patroclus roga. So why, right, cur, why are you not fighting? Non pugnas, why do you not fight is another way to translate it. Pro patria, for your country, amice. Amice is vocative, so it means friend here. So he's saying, why aren't you fighting for your country, friend, right? Patroclus asks, right, roga. Then he continues and says, tu a Trojanis maximi timeris. You, right, are greatly, or the greatest, or you might even say like very much with maxime. It's an adverb here. It's what we call a superlative. So you can kind of translate as very much. It's probably a good way. You are very much feared, right, timeris. Now, this is a passive voice verb. Again, it's got the RIS ending, which is what we're really covering in this chapter. So he's saying you are the most feared by the Trojans. There's your ablative of agent. Remember when you have passive voice verbs, if the action is being done by a person, we use a or ab, that preposition, plus the ablative case to tell you who's doing it, right? Because the subject, you, is not doing anything since it's a passive verb. So again, the way you translate that is you are the most feared, maxime timeris. You are greatly feared by the Trojans, right? So this is true. Achilles is the one they're all afraid of, right? Because he's the best fighter of the Greeks. Then you have nos impedimur quod tu non pugnas. So we are hindered. Impedimur means, it's passive. So again, it's not we are hindering someone. It means we are being hindered. What he's saying is we're not able to win. We're being like prevented or stopped, basically, because, quote, tu non pugnas, because you are not fighting. So he's blaming Achilles and saying, why aren't you fighting, right? We want to fight. We want to win. Every time you lead us, we win because the Trojans are so afraid of you, right? They fear you the most, and you're not fighting. What's going on, right? Then he continues and says, ego a Trojanis timeor. So I, ego, am feared, right, timeo, I am feared a Trojanis, by the Trojans. This is, by the way, Achilles now talking. So Patroclus says, why aren't you fighting? And Achilles responds, says, I am feared by the Trojans. Quod copias non duco vos impedimini, right, impedimini. So because I'm not leading non duco, right, it's active voice, I am not leading copias, the troops. Vos, you all, impedimini, you all are being hindered. So what we have here is Achilles is repeating the phrasing of Patroclus, which is Road to Latin's way of giving you repetition on these verbs and verb endings. It's basically the exact same thing that Patroclus said to him, just in reverse, right? So Patroclus says, when you don't lead us, we are hindered. And Achilles says, yeah, when I don't lead the troops, you all are hindered, right? Same idea. Then he continues and says, eratus tamen pro patria non pugno, Achilles responded. So I'm angry, right? Angrily, you might say. Eratus means angry, but it's almost kind of functioning as an adverb here. So you can say angry or angrily, right? However, I am not fighting non pugno. It's active voice. I am not fighting, or I do not fight pro patria, for my country. Achilles responds. So he's saying I'm not fighting because I'm angry. That's his big reason. And again, the anger of Achilles is the whole story of the Iliad, right? Which is one of our best sort of sources from Homer for the Trojan War. It starts that way, right? Singing about the anger of Achilles is a famous thing. So Achilles says, I'm angry, but I'm not fighting because I'm angry. Then you have another line here, another paragraph of Patroclus talking. It says, nos in castris a legatis tenemur quod tu in tabernaculo sedes, right? So Patroclus says, we, right, nos, we are held, tenemur, not we hold, but we are being held in castris, in the camp, a legatis, there's your ablative of agent, by the commanders, the lieutenants, you might say, the legatis. So he's saying we're not able to fight, we're being kept in camp, quod, because tu sedes, you are sitting, active voice, right? You are sitting in tabernaculo, in your tent. So he's saying they're not, the commanders aren't letting us out because you're not coming with us, right? You're sitting in our tent. So we're not able to go fight. Then he says, interdum nos e castris a copiis Trojanis pellimur. So sometimes we, right? Pelamor, we are driven back, right? So not we drive back, but we are driven back. Almost it's got the sense of repelled, right? We are driven back, ekastris, from the camps by the Copiis Troianis, by the Trojan troops. So Patroclus is saying, like, sometimes we even get driven out, right, of the camps. It's not going very well, is basically what he's saying. Okay, and again, Pelamor is passive voice. You can tell by the M-U-R ending, right? Then it continues. You have Saipe, Hastis et Sagatis Troianorum vulneramur. So often, Saipe, we are wounded, vulneramur, right? It's not active, it's passive. So he's not saying we wound anyone, but we are being wounded, right? We are wounded. Often we are wounded by what? Here, he's not talking about people wounding them. He's going to talk about things wounding them. So it's that ablative of means. There's no preposition. It's just hastis et sagatis. So we are wounded by the spears and the arrows of the Trojans, right? Troianorum. There's your genitive plural. So he says often we are wounded by their weapons, is really what he's getting at. Si a filio pelii ducimur non vincimur. He says if ducimur we are led by someone, right? Again, it's the ablative of agent, by the filio Pele, right? So we are led by the son of Peleus. Non vincimur, we are not defeated, right? Vincimur is passive, so he's not saying we can't win, we can't defeat anyone or conquer. It's passive, we are not. It's almost got the sense of we will not be defeated, but it's present here, present passive. We are not defeated. So again, he's calling on Achilles, saying, if you were leading us, we'd be fine, right? We're getting killed out here, and you're not fighting. Tuum auxilium victoriam semper porta. So your help, tuum auxilium, right? There's your subject. Your help always brings, portat, or always carries, victoriam, victory. So he's saying, when you're with us, we always win. So this is Patroclus's appeal, saying you need to come out and fight. We're getting killed here, and you're not fighting. Then he continues, you have tu ad tabernaculum non pelleris, tu in tabernaculo non teneris. So he says, you are not driven back, right? You are not driven ad tabernaculum, to the tent, right? You, too, in tabernaculo non teneris, you are not held in the tent. So he's trying to tell him, nobody drove you back to this tent, and nobody's holding you, right? You can get out whenever you want. He's like, you're being a baby, is kind of the idea. Tu non vulneraris, neque impediris, neque vinceris. So he says, you, non vulneraris, you are not wounded, right? You're not being wounded, nor hindered, impediris, nor conquered, vinceris. All of these are passive. They're second person singular passive voice verbs. So he's saying you're not being wounded, you're not being hindered, and you're not being conquered, right? That's the opposite. He said the Greeks without Achilles are being wounded, they are being hindered, and they are being conquered. But he's saying you aren't, right? Nobody's hurting you here. And then he repeats his question, cur tu non pugnas? Why are you not fighting? Right? Iterum Patroclus rogat. Again, Patroclus asks, right? Why aren't you fighting? So he keeps trying to find out why Achilles won't fight. Then you have Achilles' response. He says, Vos soci me, in castris saipe tenemini. So he says, you all, my allies, my friends is kind of what it means, right? Soci me is vocative. You, my allies, right? Often, tenemini, you are held in castris, in camp. Right, meaning you're not able to get out of your tents. A castris saipe pelimini, right? Often you are driven back from the camps, right? A castris telis Troianorum vulneramini, right? So he says you are wounded, or you are being wounded by what? Again, because it's a thing. You don't have the ablative of agent. You have the ablative of means without a preposition. So telis is what's wounding them. So he says you all are being wounded by the weapons, telis, Troianorum, of the Trojans. Vincitis et vincimini, right? You all conquer, and you all are being conquered, right? Vincitis and vincimini are the same verb, just active and passive voice. So he says, ad tabernaculum ego non pellor. I am not driven ad tabernaculum, to my tent. Ego non vulneror, neque impedior, neque vincor. So again, it's repeating the same phrasing. It says, I am not wounded, right? Not being wounded, nor being hindered, nor conquered, right? Vulneror, impedior, and vincor. Those are all passive voice verbs. He repeats his phrase where he says, so he's telling them, I'm not being wounded. You guys keep getting hurt, but not me. He's like, it's true. I'm not, nobody's conquering me. The reason why is eratus, right? Eratus tamen non pugno, Achilles clamat. So angry or angrily, however, I am not fighting, non pugno, Achilles clamat, he shouts. So it's about the fact that he's angry, right? And again, you can read up more about this, but he keeps repeating, I'm angry, so I'm not fighting. Even though his allies and Patroclus are saying, come on and fight. He's not doing it. And then he has this sort of display here where you have tum et gladium et arma et intera meted. So then he sends, it kind of has the sense of throwing, right? Because it's meted interum, he sends into the ground. It almost means he throws on the ground. His gladium, his sword, and arma and weapons, right? So he takes his sword, his weapons, all his stuff, and he throws them on the ground. He says, I'm not fighting, right? Kind of reminds me again of the kid you're playing baseball with, whoever is like, oh, I'm taking my ball, I'm going home, right? Having that sort of temper tantrum element. That's how it comes off with Achilles here. Then you have Patroclus, gladium et arma amici celerite, rather, induit. And again, now you have Orbilius talking. So this is not anyone quoting anything. This is Orbilius kind of narrating the rest of the story for the boys. Remember, he's telling his students a story. So it's Patroclus, celeriter induit. He quickly puts on the gladium, the sword, and the arma, the weapons, amici, of his friend. So this is the moment where Patroclus puts on Achilles' armor, right? Tum graikos ad muros Troiae ducet. So then he leads, meaning Patroclus leads, the graikos, the Greeks, ad muros, to the walls, Troiae, of Troy. There's your genitive, right? So Patroclus leads them to the walls of Troy. Ibi Patroclus necator. So there, Patroclus, not he kills, but passive, he is killed. So this is the famous scene of the Iliad, or the Trojan War, where Patroclus puts on Achilles' armor, right? The troops all think it's Achilles. They rally. He leads them all to Troy, and he gets killed, right? Hector kills him, and it's this dramatic moment. And this is what's when you read about the Trojan War, what sets off the rest of it. Achilles finds out, and now he's mad, and he's going to go hunt Hector and return to the battle, right? So the relationship of Patroclus and Achilles and what happens between them is sort of a critical point in the story of the Trojan War. So I'd encourage you, again, to look that up. You can find that anywhere, wherever you look for your sources, just look it up, and it's worth reading about, right? That's the cultural element behind this. If you want to, I can also link on my website. There is a section where I give a bunch of resources on the Trojan War. You can find it all there. I'll put it in the description below. That way, if you're looking for quick access to it, you can read all about it. But hopefully this went well for you. Again, you're really practicing your active and passive voice verbs here. So whenever you have passive voice verbs, again, think about how we spell them, how we conjugate them. That's the tricky part of this new grammar. Think about how we translate them, how they go with the ablative. This story, both stories in this chapter give you a lot of repetition on that, which is what you really need. That practice will help you be able to recognize them and translate them as you go. So hopefully it went pretty well for you. If you have any questions at all about my translation or anything I put in this video, just put it in the comments below. I'll be happy to help you. But otherwise, again, keep practicing it. Try the read and reread method. So again, read it, write any problem areas you have, try to fix the problem areas, and then go back and read it again. The more you read this and practice it and kind of do it with a purpose, the better off you're going to be, and the easier the Latin will be for you to understand. Good luck.